You are looking at 37 trillion gallons of water stored deep within the heart of the American West, but in a matter of months, not a single drop will be usable. This is not just another dry season or a temporary drought cycle that we have seen before. This is a complete and total structural death of a trillion-dollar engineering empire. As the water vanishes, it reveals white bathtub rings on the canyon walls like a ghost, showing the world exactly how much life has been drained away from this desert oasis. The engineers who built this massive concrete wall left behind a flaw so catastrophic and hidden that nobody dared to speak its name for more than 60 long and silent years. Look closely at these dusty turbines and the cracking earth, because the very foundation of 7 different states is beginning to crumble beneath the weight of an ancient, forgotten mistake. We were promised an endless supply of cheap power and infinite water, but those promises were built on a lie that is finally coming due in the heat of this summer. By the time this video concludes, you will finally understand why 3,370 feet is the specific number that marks the end of the American West. You will see why the dam itself, rather than the changing climate or the lack of rain, has become the greatest enemy to the 40 million people living downstream today. The clock is ticking toward a 0 hour that no one is prepared for, as the massive steel gates prepare to shut for the very last time in our history. Forget everything you thought you knew about the water crisis, because the truth is buried deep inside the concrete pipes of a dying giant that is now screaming for help. We are standing on the edge of a total collapse that will redefine how we live, eat, and survive in the desert for the next 100 years of existence. Welcome to the final days of Lake Powell, where the water is low, the stakes are high, and the structural death of a legend is unfolding right before our eyes. 1966 marked the moment when the American dream reached the high deserts of Arizona, as the massive concrete walls of Glen Canyon finally touched the burning blue sky. To the people of that era, this was not just a dam, but a crown jewel of progress, standing taller than a massive 40-story skyscraper in downtown New York. It was designed to hold back a staggering 24 million acre-feet of water, creating the largest savings account of liquid gold ever seen in the dry American Southwest. The turbines were engineered to generate over 1.3 million kilowatts of power, which was more than enough to light up 5.8 million modern suburban homes. For decades, the government sold us a vision of a desert paradise where water would always flow and the lights would never dim, no matter how hot the sun became. However, this entire empire was constructed upon a single, arrogant assumption that would eventually haunt every person living in the basin for the next 60 years of their lives. The engineers of the 1960s assumed the Colorado River would always be full of melting snow, and they never once imagined a future where the rain would simply stop. Because of this blind optimism, they placed the critical intake pipes, known as penstocks, at a height of precisely 3,490 feet above the sea level. This means that if the water level ever drops below that specific line, the massive turbines will spin into a silent death, leaving millions of people in total darkness. Most modern dams include a drain at the very bottom to keep the river flowing, but the builders of Glen Canyon decided that such a safety feature was unnecessary. They did not build a functional drain for the reservoir. Instead, they built a massive concrete prayer, hoping that the desert would remain kind to us for all of eternity. Now, that prayer is running out of time as the climate shifts and the river dries up, revealing the terrifying reality of a design that has no backup plan. We are currently witnessing the slow-motion collapse of a system that was never meant to face the harsh reality of a 21st-century mega-drought that shows no sign of ending. As the water approaches the critical intake valves, the engineers are realizing that their ancestors left them with a ticking time bomb that cannot be easily fixed or replaced. The tragedy is not that we are running out of water, but that the very structure we built to save us has now become a massive, useless tomb of steel. If the level hits that dead pool mark, the entire river stops flowing downstream, cutting off the lifeblood of Las Vegas, Phoenix, and the massive farms of Southern California. There are 2 invisible lines drawn across the massive concrete face of Glen Canyon Dam, and crossing the first one means losing power, while crossing the second means losing everything. The first critical threshold sits at 3,490 feet, a level known as the minimum power pool, where the massive hydroelectric turbines can no longer operate safely. At this height, the water pressure becomes too low, and dangerous air bubbles begin to get sucked into the spinning blades, triggering a violent phenomenon that engineers call mechanical cavitation. Cavitation is essentially the sound of steel being torn apart by microscopic explosions, as each tiny bubble collapses with the terrifying force of a small bomb against the turbine walls. If the operators do not shut down all 8 turbines immediately, the imploding bubbles will eat through inches of solid steel, shredding the billion-dollar machinery into useless piles of scrap. This would result in the sudden loss of 1.32 million kilowatts of electricity, causing a catastrophic power surge across the entire grid of the southwestern United States. As the turbines go silent, the Bureau of Reclamation is forced to rely on their final backup plan: 4 steel pipes buried deep in the dam called the River Outlet Works. These pipes are each 96 inches wide and were designed to push 15,000 cubic feet of water per second downstream to maintain the life of the lower Colorado River. In theory, this backup system should save the 40 million people living downstream from a total water cutoff. But recent inspections have revealed a dark and terrifying secret inside. In 2023, specialized inspectors crawled into these massive steel tubes and found something that sent shockwaves through the entire engineering community and the federal government in Washington. They discovered that the same deadly cavitation destroying the turbines had already started eating the steel walls of the River Outlet Works during a short test run earlier that year. An internal memo from March 2024 stated clearly that these pipes should not be relied upon as the sole means of sustained water delivery because they are literally breaking. This means the backup plan for the primary power system is already failing before it is even needed, leaving the engineers with 0 reliable options to move water downstream. If the River Outlet Works fail to operate at full capacity, the flow of water to the lower basin will simply stop, turning the Colorado River into a dry desert trail. As of April 2026, the water level at Lake Powell has dropped to 3,526 feet, which is dangerously close to the power pool line. The Bureau of Reclamation's latest forecast predicts that without a miracle, the dam could fall below the critical threshold of 3,490 feet by August 2026. This is no longer a distant problem for future generations to solve. This is a mechanical emergency that is happening in real time, right now, in the heart of America. The concrete giant is not just thirsty, it is dying from the inside out, as the steel pipes that were supposed to save it are being consumed by their own power. Every inch the water drops increases the physical stress on these aging components, creating a feedback loop of destruction that no amount of money or concrete can easily stop. Engineers are working around the clock to find a solution, but how do you fix a damaged pipe that is buried under millions of tons of solid, unmovable concrete walls? There is no shutoff valve for gravity, and there is no way to bypass the physics of water pressure that is currently tearing the heart out of this American landmark. We are witnessing the moment where 20th century engineering dreams collide with 21st century environmental reality, and the results are looking more catastrophic with every passing single day. The countdown has officially begun, and the numbers on the screen are telling a story that the federal government hoped they would never have to share with the public. Imagine the morning Glen Canyon Dam goes silent, which is not a hypothetical movie scene, but a reality calculated by complex federal infrastructure models that predict a complete and total collapse. At hour 0, the turbines stop spinning, and 1,320 megawatts of power vanish from the southwestern electrical grid, causing an immediate spike in energy prices across 7 states: Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico suddenly lose their primary source of cheap electricity, forcing local utilities to buy expensive power from other regions to keep the lights on. By day 3, the River Outlet Works are pushed to their absolute maximum capacity, but the intense pressure of the falling water begins to eat away at the already damaged steel walls. After 30 days of continuous stress, if the backup pipes finally fail, the flow of the Colorado River to the lower basin will effectively drop to 0 for the first time. Lake Mead, which is already sitting at roughly 37% of its total capacity, begins its own terrifying death spiral, as its primary source of water is completely cut off. As Lake Mead drops, the iconic Hoover Dam will also lose its ability to generate electricity, leaving the city of Las Vegas and 40 million people wondering how they will survive. But there is a hidden factor that almost nobody in the media is talking about today, and it is a secret buried under millions of tons of heavy river mud and silt. Decades of accumulating sediment at the bottom of Lake Powell has displaced millions of acre-feet of actual water storage, making the lake level appear much higher than it actually is. When you look at the official numbers, you are seeing a lie because the bottom of the lake is rising every year, leaving much less usable water than the government reports show. This crisis will hit the massive industrial farms that grow 90% of the winter vegetables consumed by the entire nation, leading to empty grocery store shelves and skyrocketing food costs. The fastest-growing cities in America, including Phoenix and Tucson, are now facing a future where their taps might actually run dry because of a single dam built on a dream. 40 million people are connected to this single river system, and each of them is currently living on borrowed time while the water levels continue to drop toward the final line. The economic domino effect will be felt from the small, rural towns to the massive tech hubs of California, as the cost of living becomes impossible for the average American family. We have trapped ourselves in a modern civilization that depends entirely on a fragile concrete wall that was never designed to handle the reality of a world that is running dry. The threat is not just a lack of rain, but the collapse of the very infrastructure that allowed 40 million people to thrive in a place that was never meant for humans. Every day that we wait for a solution, the dominoes get closer to falling, and once the first one goes down, there is no stopping the chain reaction that will follow. The American West as we know it is about to change forever, and we are all watching the last few grains of sand fall through the hourglass of Glen Canyon Dam. As the lights go out and the water stops flowing, the people of the Southwest will finally realize that nature has its own way of reclaiming the land we stole. To be fair and balanced, we must acknowledge that the federal government of the United States is not simply standing still while this massive engineering disaster unfolds in our modern era. Emergency measures were recently announced in April 2026 to release between 660,000 to 1 million acre-feet of water from the massive Flaming Gorge Reservoir. This northern reservoir is currently sitting at 83% capacity, and officials hope this massive injection of water will provide a much-needed lifeline to the dying Lake Powell Reservoir. At the same time, the government has decided to reduce the amount of water released from Powell down to Lake Mead from 7.48 to 6 million acre-feet. The primary goal of these desperate emergency patches is to push the water level back up by 54 feet, hopefully crossing the safe mark of 3,500 feet by next April. However, many experts believe these temporary fixes are merely tiny bandages placed on a massive structural wound that will eventually require a much more radical and permanent surgical engineering solution. The 7 basin states are currently locked in a bitter political battle over who must take the biggest cuts, and as of February 2026, they still cannot agree. While the politicians argue over legal papers and water rights, something truly strange and hauntingly beautiful is happening at the silent edges of the rapidly receding and drying lake bed. Ancient treasures that were drowned under 300 feet of dark water in 1966 are finally starting to emerge back into the bright light of the modern desert sun. Places like the cathedral in the desert and the music temple, once thought to be lost forever to history, are now showing their magnificent red sandstone walls once again today. These ghosts of Glen Canyon are returning to remind us that nature is slowly reclaiming what was taken from her. Over 60 long years of human engineering and industrial dominance, we are witnessing a silent revolution where the canyons are literally rising from their watery graves, even as the lights of our great southwestern cities begin to flicker and dim. The fundamental question we must face is not whether the dam will eventually fail us, but whether we will be ready to live in a world without its artificial support. If we do not find a way to replace the electricity and water provided by this dying concrete giant, 40 million people will be left standing in the dark tomorrow. We were warned 60 years ago that this day would eventually come, specifically when the original engineers forgot to build a functional drain at the very bottom of the dam. Now we are paying the price for that arrogance, as the structural death of Lake Powell transforms from a distant technical warning into a terrifying and immediate daily reality for everyone. Perhaps the return of the ancient Anasazi ruins and the hidden beauty of the canyons is a sign that the era of massive concrete dams is finally reaching its inevitable end. As we look toward an uncertain future, we must decide if we will continue to fight against the river or learn to live with the natural cycles of the desert land. The clock has stopped ticking, and the decision is no longer in our hands as the water level drops toward the final and absolute 0 point of the American West. If this video has truly changed how you see the massive Colorado River crisis, please drop a comment with the single word drain to show that you are paying attention. Every voice matters in this conversation about our collective survival, and your engagement helps us bring these critical and hidden stories to millions of other people around the world. Thank you for watching this deep investigation into the death of Lake Powell, and we hope you will join us next time as we explore the future of our planet. Stay informed, stay curious, and always remember that the most dangerous mistakes are often the ones that we choose to ignore for far too many years of our history. The destiny of 40 million people is now written in the drying mud of the Colorado River, and the final chapter of this epic story is being written right now. We must look beyond the concrete and the steel to see the true value of the water that sustains our lives and our families in this beautiful desert.